A Fulton woman will spend more than 17 years in prison for covering up the death of Carl DeBrody. Now, this is a case that ABC 17 News has been following since 2017. Fulton police found DeBrody's body encased in concrete within a storage unit back in April of 2017. Sherry Paulo was convicted of failing to provide medical care to DeBrody, resulting in injury and death, and one count of health care fraud. We have live team coverage of today's sentencing. ABC 17's Zach Boetto and I were at the federal courthouse today for that sentencing. And Zach, the sentence followed federal guidelines, but the extreme circumstances in this case clearly strained even the federal judge today.
Yeah, Deb, inside of that federal courtroom, Judge Wimes was visibly shaken up and said this is one of the most deplorable, disturbing, and depraved cases he's ever been assigned to. He even mentioned he would hand down more punishment, but he was bound to some federal guidelines.
This is not a case of premeditated murder or a case that would require the death penalty because of how it happened.
The unique circumstances that led to the death of Carl DeBrody make the 17.5-year sentencing handed down to Sherry Paulo a bit complicated to understand. Bill Tackett, a former prosecutor who now practices as a defense attorney, says it comes down to a federal guideline grid.
So the judge turns to what is really a grid. It's called the federal sentencing guidelines, and then you can plug in various aspects that give you the number of years in the end that they should be sentenced to.
Here's what that grid looks like. Tackett says once the case's circumstances are plugged into the federal sentencing guidelines, they're measured, and as a result, you get a sentence that is on par with other cases that are similar.
You have somebody who had this horrible thing happen to them, but it's not a premeditated murder or a bar fight where somebody dies. It's such an unusual case that the federal guidelines really had to kick in and determine what was fair.
And Deb, Tackett went on to say that this is a fair sentencing in relation to what the federal guidelines have mentioned in the past. Reporting live from outside of the station, Zach Boetto, ABC 17 News.
Okay, thank you, Zach. And family members and former guardians of Carl DeBrody were glad to see justice served today, though. I was in the courtroom this afternoon when the maximum sentencing was handed down to Sherry Paulo. Now, Carl's aunt, Carol Sampson, and Carl's biological brother, Nicholas Clark, had a moment before the judge to talk about why they wanted to see Sherry Paulo get the maximum sentence. Now, both of them expressed what this case has done to them physically and the emotional toll this has had on both of them. Now, both of them also said it was so hard to grasp someone that was supposed to care for Carl that was capable of doing something like this. Now, former caregiver who you see here, Mary Martin, said that she was glad to see Paulo get the maximum amount, but wished that she was charged with higher crimes.
I'll be glad when this is done, so that, because up until when all this starts hitting, then I start thinking of all the suffering that he went through. Now we can just think, you know, once this is done, we will think about the fun times that we had.
ABC 17 News has been following this case since the federal and state investigation started in April of 2017. Coming up tonight at 6, they'll give you more of a timeline of what all happened in this case, along with more about what the judge had to say.